So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the BDO NAACAM Nelson Mandela Bay Business Chamber Roundtable Discussion. The reason why we call them Roundtable Discussion is because it's not like your normal panel discussion where you have a facilitator that's just asking questions. I think it's just going to be more of a conversation. We will allow the audience, if you guys have got some questions as well, just to ask questions. So we're here to basically talk about future mobility. I think to wrap up the fantastic NAACAM show that we had this week starting on Monday. I must say I get to play golf for the first time. It was an interesting one. I think when I got to the 9th hole, I was like, yeah, this thing has to end now. It felt like it was just taking forever. We basically had to talk about future mobility, but before we start, I'm terrible at introducing people, so I'm going to allow you guys just to introduce yourselves, and then maybe I'll start with you, Yanesh.
Thanks. Yeah. So Yanesh Naidoo from Gendermark Automation. Basically, my experience has been designing and building production lines that assemble automotive components, including internal combustion and EV. So my position definitely comes from a manufacturing perspective.
Cool. Beth Dealtry, Head of Policy and Regulatory Affairs at NAACAM. My background is originally in economics, although at the moment I think I consider myself possibly more of an events manager with the NAACAM show. But yeah, background is really around the policy element and NAACAM's work in both trying to preserve what we have as existing capabilities in South Africa, but also how do we prepare ourselves for future EV mobility as well.
All right.
Martin Zanne, I'm the Chair in Automotive Engineering at AIDC and Nelson Mandela University. My background really is originally mobile networks. I grew up in R&D of mobile networks in Germany. And there I learned the rule of exponentiality, and I will talk about it just now. And then I spent time in South Africa running mobile networks across Africa, and then joined CSR as Executive Head of Material Science and Manufacturing. And that's really where I got involved in Industry 4.0, new energy vehicles, things like that. And yeah, I'm currently also consulting in this space, so that's my background.
Yeah, you see, I was never going to get that right. I was never going to get it right. So Beth, I think NAACAM made history this week. We're coming from, or rather wrapping up what I think was a very successful NAACAM show. It's historical because it's the first time coming to the Eastern Cape, Nelson Mandela Bay, basically the home of automotive. Also looking at the attendance and looking at the excitement, because I was literally there from Monday, like I said. I think I attended all of the sessions. Everyone was excited. I think day one of the conference, we had Minister Pakstawu, the Minister of Trade and Industry. Day two, we had the Deputy President. We had the Minister of SMMEs, as well as our Premier. What was interesting, though, is that with all the address that day, their presentation and their talks, there was a focus on a number of things. I think one of them being localization. Number two, the fact that we need to start looking at other markets, but more specifically looking at Africa as a new market, because I mean it's a continent with a population of about 1.5 billion. Obviously touched on APDP2, and then also touched on the importance of protecting the automotive ecosystem. So maybe Beth, I'm just going to start with you. If you can maybe just start your thoughts, your highlights in terms of the NAACAM show. What are the takeaways, and maybe what do we then need to do going forward?
Yeah, that's a tough question to start with. There's a lot to sum up from it. Look, I think NAACAM show as a core kind of mandate or principle behind the NAACAM show is really to showcase excellence in the auto component manufacturing value chain. I think the OEMs are often viewed as the rock stars. There's shiny Mercedes to put a signature on and the like when you go to their shows or visit their plants. And we're the unsung heroes. You don't see our parts, but we are an essential part of the vehicle. And so for us, it's really about trying to get awareness of exactly that and really showcase excellence. And I think particularly from an exhibition side, anyone who walked through that exhibition would know, I think certainly that part of the brief was well achieved. I think we really did put on an excellent display of exactly what we're all about and exactly why we're such an important part of the South African economy. I don't even want to just say of manufacturing. I think Deputy President said in a speech yesterday, we really are a backbone of South Africa's economy. And from a component side, we always are also unequivocal in that for South African industry that is just OEMs makes no sense, nor does it anywhere in the world. We are where the jobs sit, we are where localization sits, we are where skills development sits. And so I think that really did come across quite strong across the conference platforms and the exhibition. From a conferencing perspective, I think there was a lot of discussion around exactly as you said. For me, the big takeout was the collaboration side of things. I don't think we've ever seen as much government interest in the component sector. I don't think we've ever seen as much what we call kind of associated partners interest in the component sector. And I think we've now got all the voices in the room, and I think all the voices coalescing around a singular sector. And whilst there's multiple challenges, the recognition that we have a big challenge to start addressing. The show took place at a really interesting time in that, on one hand, that time everyone's really busy and stressed and concerned about where the industry's going. And so there was a question mark around, well, would there be good uptake of the conference? But at the same time, it's a critical time because this is where the conversations really need to move beyond conversation and into actual action. Otherwise, we're never going to really move the sector forward. So I think in that sense, the right conversations were had, the right kind of points were probably hit upon. Now, certainly as an association, and I hope the rest of the sector, we've now got everyone kind of linked up and together. Now it's really about, well, what do we do to pave the path forward so that I can say maybe in a year's time, well, cool, not only was the NAACAM show a success from a pure event perspective, but it was also a success in terms of maybe changing the direction of the industry a bit and moving it forward.
All right, thanks. I think I want to pose the same question to you, Martin and Yanesh, in terms of your thoughts in terms of the conference, because I think it is important. Like I said, it started the right conversations. I think everyone is aligned in terms of the issues. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it was very refreshing. I really enjoyed the contributions of everybody, of the panels, the speakers, and the initiatives which are being triggered, and the support from government. Really good to hear. Obviously, the rubber needs to hit the road, and it needs to hit the road very, very, very quickly. So fortunately, we have a strong existing industry, but it's at a big turning point, as a lot of the speakers said. New energy vehicles, particularly battery electric vehicles coming in, hydrogen a little bit further down the road, but battery electric certainly is going to disrupt a lot of things. But it's about electrification, so the whole adjacencies to the electric vehicle, like charging infrastructure, supply of energy to the charging infrastructure, things like that need to be hammered out very, very quickly. Maybe one needs to continue the conversation with the component manufacturers around, the adjacencies. So charging infrastructure, and there's some private initiatives like Charge or Zero Carbon Charge and Rubicon, companies like that have triggered a lot of effort to provide a charging infrastructure, but it's very small. So when we talk automotive and automotive industry and new energy vehicles, we actually can talk a lot broader, okay? Because suddenly going into renewable energy, solar systems. So who's supplying the complete renewable energy infrastructure? Batteries, not only for vehicles, but there's a lot of links to home installations. Some people talk about that in future you'll be buying a home battery with an attached electric vehicle. So because your battery will be the biggest expense for your home and for your car. So these type of conversations all linked. It's an ecosystem that is becoming more and more integrated. We talk about electric everything. So the industry needs to start moving very quickly from the pure mechanical side to an integration of electric drives, you very quickly talk about software infrastructure. I didn't hear enough at NAACAM about software-defined vehicles, which is the future. 30% of the value of a modern new energy vehicle, or even ICE vehicle, is software. So where are the software companies? So these type of things, I think we can expand that type of conversation going forward.
Thanks, Martin. I think you're touching on a very important thing here. I think almost like the creation of a new ecosystem. But before we get into the details of it, I know Yanesh is itching to respond to some of your comments.
We can definitely debate the EV topic, yeah. but your initial question is the show. So maybe I'll try to frame my thoughts in two pieces. Firstly, well done, Beth and team. Amazing show. If you wanted to see excellence on display from a tier 1, tier 2 perspective, tier 3 perspective, it was 100% hit. So I think what can be done was on show, and it just shows the capability that the NAACAM membership and the whole automotive supply chain can offer end to end. So I think that was really amazing. It was great to network and catch up with people that you haven't seen in a long time. So I think that part was an 11 out of 10 in my opinion. The other side of it, which is obviously the conferencing and all that kind of stuff, where politicians in particular, are talking about what they might do. There was a lot of we need to, as I've discussed earlier. But to be honest with you, I've got zero faith that anything is going to go beyond just talking. We've seen that for the last 10 years. There's only so much and I see some of our customers in the audience here today, there's only so much a factory can do by themselves. The biggest issues we have are the infrastructure around the factory. I mean, we can drive efficiency 1 or 2% higher in factories for sure. But when you have ports and electricity and labor issues, all these issues around a factory, there's only so much a plant head can actually do, right? Yeah. And there was a lot of we need to, and for 10 years it hasn't happened. So even though it was a great event, I didn't leave with any faith that anything's going to change, to be honest.
No, thanks, Yanesh. I think maybe then linking to what Martin was saying with regards to the creation of the new ecosystem, and again to what I alluded to earlier on, the fact that we need to be looking at the new market, which is Africa. The reality is that Africa doesn't have the infrastructure for what we call future mobility and EVs or electronic vehicles. Besides the issue of policy, which I'm going to come on but now, what needs to happen? I hear and understand what you're saying, that look, you don't have faith in what was being said but by the politicians. But what needs to happen? Are we looking at the right direction in terms of focusing on EVs, or should we just be looking at ICE? I think he's itching to respond.
I was thinking about it on the way here, and I can draw, and I mentioned the mobile networks on purpose in the beginning, because I watched how quickly the world changed, in the 90s, with the advent of mobile networks, the internet, and so on, IP communication. And I believe that when the technology is ripe, and it's the right technology, people will adapt. Okay, and adopt, and you saw it with mobile communications, digitalization. In that space, it was like an explosion, and I similarly think that that's going to happen now with electric vehicles, renewable energy, and I can quote a very good example where I was involved during my CSR days in a project in Uganda with the GIZ. We went and observed it, and mobile networks put up base stations, and they ran them on diesel generators because there was no grid. Okay, and then they eventually said, renewables have become so cheap, why don't we put up solar panels? And then they said, while we're putting up solar panels for these and batteries for these base stations, why don't we make them a little bit bigger and supply the village around which is around the base station, because that's what happened as people converged near the mobile network. And suddenly you had businesses enabled. You could run fridges, you could have sell coke. You could have a butcher. You could have a welding business. So this is, Africa is different to the rest of the world. So and the technology was adopted and is being adopted across Africa. And in South Africa, we can see how quickly, with load shedding, how quickly everyone jumped onto solar panels, on the rooftop solar. And that's probably one of the reasons we don't have load shedding anymore, is because everyone's got their own supply, and they're not dependent on the grid anymore. And, so I think it's that exponential curve that we're on the knee of that exponential curve. And we're going to see, just pure cost and price driving forward the adoption of technology. So generating electricity on your own is much cheaper than buying it from the grid. Running an electric vehicle is going to be much cheaper than running an ICE vehicle in all senses. So that's going to be a big technology driver. And so I'm pretty confident, and I hope this answers the question.
Yeah, no, it does. I'm not sure if Yanesh, you want to touch on that as well.
So I like Martin's analogy of the mobile networks, because I think the mobile networks were answering the why, and the adoption was because there was a strong understanding as to why it makes sense to adopt. My opinion on electric vehicles is I think we've misunderstood the why. And I'll give you some stats. This is 4 years ago. I made a video. Actually, it's still there. You should go and dig it up. But if you take 100% of carbon emissions in the world, 14% come from transportation. Of that 14% of transportation, 7% comes from vehicles that we drive around on the road. So if we ever get to 7% or 50% electric vehicles, and we so-called greenify everything, we only solve, 3.5% of global carbon emissions. And does it make sense to radically change a whole industry and disrupt so many things for 3.5% gain on carbon? Because the whole driver of EVs, the why today is green, right? If it's a technology perspective, from a technology perspective, I want an EV because it's a cool tech car. If it becomes cheaper, the why becomes completely different to emissions. It becomes because it's cheaper and more efficient. So I'm not anti-EVs, but I think the why has not been understood, and I think it's been hyped up for completely the wrong reasons. And this completely disrupted industries. There's huge losses in jobs for potentially 3.5% gaining in carbon. But we sell it as renewable, but there's nothing renewable about an EV.
So can I?
Yeah, of course.
Yes, I'm not giving you a chance, but I do need to respond to that. So there was an interesting video, and I was just trying to think of the guy who put forward this hypothesis, and apologize to him for using his argumentation. But imagine if we didn't have ICE vehicles and everybody was driving around in electric vehicles, okay? And someone came along and said, I've got this fantastic invention. You take oil and refine it into petrol, and you put it into a cylinder, and you create an explosion, and then you make 4 of them in a line, and you make a couple of thousand explosions every minute. And then you convert that through an oil bath and a drive, and you need a clutch mechanism, some gears, and a drive shaft and a differential, and then obviously you need a fuel tank, and this stuff is actually quite dangerous. So it's very flammable, so you need special fueling stations. Do you think anybody would change from an electric vehicle to something ominous like that? No one would.
No.
So it's my electric vehicle is perfectly safe. Battery technology was for a while problematic, but LFP battery technology is not doesn't have thermal runaways. It's only the higher energy chemistry configurations that are really dangerous. But even those are under control now. So. The electric vehicle is an absolute no-brainer from a technology point of view. It's not something that the first cars were in fact electric, and it was an oil and gas industry that drove the adoption of ICE engines, and even blocked over the decades, and for a good century, blocked any development in electric vehicles. So the world has changed now. We've said there's a lot of issues with the oil and gas industry. It's not only the 3% pollution from the cars, so to speak, but it's the devastation that the oil and gas industry has done with oil wells. People need to look at as well. So it's a disaster, and it's a scarce resource. It's going to run out. So we've got an infinite resource from the sun. Okay, it becomes free. If you put a solar installation in your house, you pay it off over 3 to 5 years, and then your energy is free. Free. There's nothing cheaper than free. And so to me, it's as people switch, the mindset. And yes, we've all got used to driving every week to the petrol station, filling up, going in and buying some milk and some bread while we're filling up and so on. That's the old paradigm. The new paradigm is going to be, you don't drive to a petrol station anymore. If you do, then it's a fast charging infrastructure where you spend maximum 5 to 10 minutes recharging your vehicle, and this is all possible. And then you maybe stay there for a cup of coffee because there's a huge cafe there, fancy place that people meet at to exchange, business notes. But the paradigm is going to shift completely. Okay, and the rest of the time you charge the vehicle at home.
Thanks, Martin. I wanna bring in Beth, but before Beth, I bring you in, just with our audience, if any of you have got a question, just raise your hand. We've got one already. Sorry, just a second, you're going to be mic'd up.
Yeah. In terms of with the oil and the gas, I mean, at the end of the day, even if you have an electric vehicle, your components inside, plastic is basically from oil. So you're never going to get rid of oil. And I mean, if you think about the whole world, and plastic is a big thing in our lives. Yes, we're trying to get rid of because of what's happening with, it's not biodegradable in that, but we were always going to have oil. I just wanted to put that out there.
May I respond quickly? I absolutely agree. So the oil and gas industry will change. Okay, so, that's a large part of what Sasol does is actually make plastics. Or the pellets for plastics, and that is going to carry on. And we've fortunately, developed the whole plastic industry further, so that there's plastic recycling. But let's say the overall consumption, because of you don't have the vehicles, And I just need to give one additional example. The trucking industry and bus industry in South Africa uses 60% of all the diesel consumed in South Africa. Most of that is imported, and the annual import bill for diesel is horrendous. Okay, I mean Eskom is now using a lot of diesel as well, but if you converted the complete trucking industry to electric, battery electric or hydrogen electric, okay, you wouldn't need the diesel. You wouldn't need that import of diesel anymore. And that would save us in foreign expenses a huge amount of money, which we could then reinvest into paying for infrastructure build-out. So we're being dominated by an oil and gas industry, which is not even a local industry. If we had unlimited oil, if we were an oil country, maybe we'd have a different conversation, because it's like the coal conversation. But we're not. So why are we doing this? So we need to change. That's really
but I think that you're just switching the import from oil to batteries from China.
But they last a lot longer.
But I think it's about the dominance, right? I think there's certainly a dominance factor. Oil, and without a doubt, unethically, in my opinion, dominated the world, how we transport for many, many years, and that's not right. And I don't think that's any different to what's happening now with batteries.
Yeah.
It's the same intention, right? Let's dominate, let's invade and control. That's what battery and solar is at the moment. 80% of that is made in China. So you're switching from one to another.
Should we talk about batteries for a bit?
Before we talk about batteries, sorry, I just wanna bring in Beth. So just two questions, Beth. What's the response from your members? When I say your members, I mean the members within NAACAM when it comes to future mobility. And I think secondly, I think for what we're discussing now, for it to be able to happen, we need policy. What's happening currently with NEV policy? Is it in place? Has it been implemented? Where are we? Especially looking at the fact that, look, already China is pushing, they're oversupplying and all of that,
Look, so maybe slightly controversial, but to some extent I think it's kind of become, and I don't want to say a white elephant and belittle what the kind of transition needs to be or is, but equally I do think there is a white elephant element to it. And the reason I say that is, first of all, from a membership perspective, if I look at my member categories and what we have in South Africa, first of all, quite a large contingent produce what we call technology agnostic components. And the example I always use is a seat is a seat is a seat. Whether it's in an internal combustion engine vehicle or an electric vehicle, it's still there. And so in that sense, this whole nervousness around a transition, and I know there's always a lot of commentary that no, we need to have duty-free imports of EV components. No one's really given the definition of what an EV component is. Is it a seat in an EV or is it a new NEV type technology? I don't believe that's necessary. I really do believe as a sector, with a large amount of technology agnostic components, plus an industry that naturally will always invest as we get the RFQs or the opportunity comes about. If our OEM tells us, Yanesh, we need this, please invest, Yanesh is going to invest. Or they bring in the multinational suppliers if the capability doesn't exist here. So for me, I don't honestly view a transition from a component perspective as a mission impossible. I also think it's somewhat, yes, while looking at the future, and we do need to support future technologies, we do need to find a way of bringing it in. And the reality is we do have to have a transition. Our biggest export market is Europe. We know Europe's got a ban on internal combustion engine vehicles. That realistically is why we as South Africa need to be transitioning. From a South African domestic market perspective, right now, and I think for a lot of the world, kind of multi-platform pathway makes a lot of sense. And in South Africa, particularly at the moment, I just can't see a world where within the next few years we have mass adoption of NEVs. There's just too many structural issues. And if we're talking Africa, it's even worse in that sense. So the reason we need a transition is Europe. There's no question about it. That's our end customer. That's why we're transitioning. But we often forget, and so we do need to support, just to finish that tangent, we do need to support kind of importing of skill, not of the component, but bringing in the capability to be producing these technologies. Mostly IP is actually probably what's needed here. But I do think we kind of forget that we actually have a really robust sector already. And I know we had a lot of conversations on the show floor, and one of the guys in the audience will know. We talk about all these new kind of energy components, and we forget, well, we've got the catalytic converter industry, which has been a big kind of bedrock of our sector for so long, and the world isn't 100% EV at this point. We need to still support that. And so my kind of opinion, and I think NAACAM's in general, is if we support the overall competitiveness of manufacturing, if we fix the port problems, if we fix load shedding, if we fix all of the more structural elements around the sector which make us as competitive as is possible, the transition becomes a hell of a lot easier. And existing industries do better, right? Because then you've just got a competitive base for manufacturing. And ultimately, if you look at most of the countries around the world, that's what you need. A competitive base for manufacturing, and then most things are possible in that sense. So I think, for me personally, that's really where, and I think a lot of the discussions over the last few days have been focusing, and maybe there will be some comments around it wasn't so future mobility focused, but a lot of the conversations were around, well, what do we need to do to restore core competitiveness? And I think that is the biggest policy question at the moment, is how do we restore core competitiveness in our manufacturing sector? A lot of that comes down to volumes, but that's another story.
Is it also not impacted by policy? No.
It is. No, it's a policy, and I think that's where we're saying is, for us, the APDP is, well, it's under review at the moment, or it's about to kick off a review. And there's a lot more inherent policy elements there that need to be tackled before I think we need a massive reconceptualized NEV-specific policy. I think if we get APDP2 spot on from a competitiveness, localization, domestic market development, production growth, if we get those kind of key elements right, we're a lot of the way there. Then yes, of course, there will probably need to be, and I think we already do have AIS coming in with an increased incentive for NEV investments. There do need to be those kind of injections in to support, because there is a lot of reinvesting that will be required. But I think APDP2 is where the heart of the problem initially lies, and then there'll be other supportive policies that will be kind of tagged on to that to push the sector forward. Maybe the final thing that I've also always said in this is, at least for the short to medium term, I think ICE still has a big role to play in the global manufacturing economy in that sense. But as we do move on, I certainly don't have the crystal ball that tells us whether it will be 100% EV, what the FCEV will be, mix will be, what the ICE will be. But I do think there's a role for it all to be played for, I think. And we do need to try and make a plan that preserves existing stuff before we forget all about that and just move towards that NEV side. Last part of policy that I do think could work from an EV perspective, we've never as South Africa been forceful on a localization front. We've kind of had a trickle-down expectation. What is stopping the government from saying, okay, we fix competitiveness elements, but OEMs, if you want to produce here, this is the component you're localizing, or this is the subgrouping of components you localize. And for you to get a consumer incentive, because a lot of the EV conversation lies around consumer incentives, for you to get that, we need that. And I think those kind of tweaks and mixes will probably take us a step closer towards the end goal. But I also I don't think it's as doom and gloom and panicky as it sometimes is made out to be in the media.
Yeah, I think you're touching now on another topic which I do not want us to go to, because there's a debate of your CKD, SKD, and the policies around the new OEMs that are wanting to invest in the country and all of that. But I think it's a debate for another day. You touched on skills, and Martin, you obviously represent Nelson Mandela University. I just want to touch on skills. Do we have the right skills locally? If we don't, what do we need to do to ensure that we have the right skills? So I'm going to start with you, Martin, and then I also, Yanesh, want you to touch on the Odin program that you guys have, which is obviously designed to ensure that there are those future skills that we need in the auto industry. Yeah.
So there's, we talked about it yesterday afternoon a little bit. There's a big shift coming in how people obtain skills and the definition. What is a skill? Okay, and what is knowledge? What is a skill? And how do I deal with the amazing rate of change that we're facing at the moment? And a child going into school today will work in jobs that haven't even been defined yet. Okay, so that's that's always what people are saying. So, and I can believe it because it's happening at the moment. So how do we advise students what to do? So it goes back to embark on a life of continuous learning. Okay, the half-life of your knowledge is 3 years. So what you learn today is going to be half, valuable in 3 years' time. So if you're not learning every day, every year, you're going to fall behind. Okay, you have to be creative. You have to be innovative. So we're moving from a world that was driven by knowledge, where you went and studied and you did a PhD and you became an expert in your field. You were the knowledgeable person. Everybody came to you to listen to you. You were the person sitting on the hill and people would come to you. Those days are over. Okay. In fact, a lot of the big players in the world are saying that actually don't want people who've studied for too long because they've got stuck. They want people who come straight out of school, maybe do a basic degree, because you still have to train the mind in your thinking processes, but then get involved in doing something constructive, and live life in industry, and you'll learn more there than you will at any university. So, people are talking about the end of the brick and mortar university as well, and you can see it with Udemy. Odin is a good example. So, skills have changed. You can learn a skill on your own, okay? It doesn't change the fact, though, that you need to integrate yourself with people. So people skills are probably going to be the most important thing to learn and to keep on top of. Working in teams, working together. So that's going to be a big part of the training. Unfortunately, we see too often people coming out of a university, 4-year university degree, and they actually non-functional in a working environment because they haven't learned how to work in the working environment. And so that's where we're looking at a big shift. Doesn't take away, sorry, just to finish off, last sentence, doesn't take away from deep research. So you will always have institutions that will have academics that will dig into a topic, okay? And it'll be the universities, it'll be the CSRs, it'll be the Fraunhofer Institutes, the Harvards, that will need to dig into deep research. So that'll always exist.
Yanesh, I'm assuming then you with Odin, GenderMark is trying to bridge that gap that Martin is talking about, where after 4 years at university, I'm still not useful to my employer. How does Odin work? How does it support the automotive industry? And does it have a link to new energy vehicles? How does it work?
So there's two pieces to it. The one is before you enter the factory, and the one is after you're in the factory. So the before you enter the factory, I see there's a gentleman from AutoX over there, right? So they have a set of skills that are required if they're looking to employ people. They need a set of skills that are required, and as you say, many institutions after 4 years, they still need to invest in those skills in that person that's already spent 4 years in university. So with our Odin education program, what we're trying to do is we're trying to streamline in understanding what does AutoX specifically need, and creating content around that, putting that into a series of devices that kids have. So in South Africa now we have 2,000 kids on the program. And so AutoX can contribute content into that device, and if kids show interest and engage with that kind of content, we can at least say to AutoX, here's 3 kids, they're very interested in lead-acid battery manufacturing. They've got a good understanding. We kind of test that understanding to show that deep interest in the topic. They can then provide more content to those 3 or 4 kids that are interested, and those kids out of school will be closer to what AutoX needs than a 4-year degreed person. And that's the intention of the program. So it's very, very early on, and we've got the first kids through that program. So the idea is to be able to engage with industry, understand specifically what they want, enable industry to create that content themselves. I see Eberspecker, or Purem, Kieran over here. What he may need, we can facilitate the creation of that content for Purem, put that into the device, and then find the kids that are interested. Not force it onto them, but the kids that are interested and are passionate about what Purem does can be funneled to Purem. So that's the before you enter the factory part. Once you're in the factory part, this is where we start to use some advanced technologies like AI and computer vision to help guide the operator to be able to perform their tasks more effectively, assembling a component as an example. Think of it as Google Maps for the operator. Even to the point where they make a mistake, we provide the U-turn on how to resolve that mistake. So what we're essentially doing is we're now reducing the skills required to assemble complex components inside a factory with the aid of technology. So one of the principles is that technology shouldn't increase the skills required for an operator. It should be the opposite. It should be reducing the skills required for an operator, which means that the pool of people that can go and do meaningful work is now much bigger, because technology is that co-pilot for that person in the factory, and the factory doesn't need to take the risk of quality, productivity, etc. And so those are the 2 elements of Odin that we're trying to solve.
Thanks. Martin, I'm just going to ask a question, but I do not want you to answer it now because I want to quickly jump on to Beth. We obviously now then seeing private sector filling in the gap which they identify in terms of skills shortages. Our traditional institutions of learning not moving fast enough? But just pause. Don't answer yet. Beth, your members, I'm sure they come to you with a long list of problems. Is skills one of those problems that they come to you with?
Yeah, 100%, without a doubt. I mean, NAACAM, I look after policy and regulatory affairs, but we have a projects division. and we have a skills project manager for a very specific reason, and it's exactly that. There's a lot of, particularly from, and it's interesting to kind of get the people skills and your more kind of soft skills versus your harder skills. So I know there's always talk, tool makers, metrologists, those kind of more technical skills. Apologies, let me stop that. Those kind of more technical skills, certainly there's a shortage of, but more and more we've done multiple kind of skills shortage studies, skills gap analysis, those type of research reports, and more the soft skills and digital skills. If you speak to a lot of our members, they'll say, you know what, from a technical perspective, we'll find a way, we're going to train it on our own shop floor, we've got our own specifics, but where there really is the shortage is around the more soft skills, and then also the culture element. Are people entering the company wanting to learn, wanting to create an impact, wanting to really get up to speed as quickly as possible, interact with their teammates in a way that is suitable for the operating environment. So I think that's where the kind of a bigger part of the gap is now sitting. And so we're trying to work, and we work closely with NAACAM primarily as the sector training authority in that sense. And we've been trying to pilot a few projects with different members around, well, how do we merge together the technical elements, which we certainly need, but throw in some more of the people and soft skill side of it to try and create a well-rounded individual. But without a doubt, maybe after load shedding imports and the more immediate is my plant running, skills is up there certainly with one of the biggest challenges. But I think I'm not necessarily negative about what our future skills outlook looks like. I do think as much as maybe as the bottom end, there's a lot of work to be done to fill the gap. I know Yanesh and I have had the conversation before, which is we do actually have a lot of very talented and skilled individuals in this country. For me, the big thing is how are we getting them into the automotive sector. More and more we see our best trained are going to consultancies and the like, and really we need to try and make automotive attractive, and particularly automotive component manufacturing attractive, so they're not going. The OEMs can have some of them, but we need them to also come into the component sector. And so that's also for me is maybe the part that we often forget with the skills gap is not that there's necessarily not skilled people around, it's are they coming into our industry?
Valid point. Martin, back to the question I asked, and then I think once you're done with responding, and I think you two gentlemen wanted to go into a debate about batteries.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe just to start at the point where I left off earlier on about the brick and mortar institution. There will always be the place for the brick and mortar institution, and I think PTSA across South Africa, and they here in Quebec as well, is a good example. Tool makers. So we will for a long time still need expert tool makers, and that's a hands-on job. You have to learn how to work with machines, materials. You inventing, maybe as you're going along, a tool needs to be refined. You're trying, a little bit of trial and error, but you need to understand materials, you need to understand machines and things like that. So that needs to have a home, and it's going to be a brick and mortar place, okay? And you need guidance. You're going to walk in there, if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to lose your hand, So that type of thing cannot change very quickly and will not change very quickly. So that's going to be around for a very long time. Maybe eventually when the humanoids, AI-driven humanoids that can do all of these things, then that might change, But that's still a long way away. So in the meantime, we need stability. We do need policy. We do need safety standards. We do need accreditation. And that's really the big driver at the moment. And EXA there's a requirement, a legal requirement that every engineer practicing engineering needs to be registered at EXA as a professional engineer. And that's good. It needs to be that way because we do need to uphold certain standards. And that's the role of the institutions. And they have to be very, very careful that they don't change too quickly, because then they leave, 90% behind, 10% get it, 90% have lost the plot, and then we're in chaos. So, the process of accreditation courses, we're setting up a Smart Academy at the moment at the AIDC, and, very quickly you get into the discussion. You're going to give courses, you're going to train people there, You're going to give them a certificate? Oh, okay. You're going to give them a certificate, but what is the value of that certificate? Just because this person signed it, okay, doesn't mean that has any value. Okay, so because you're standing on the shoulders of giants in big institutions, they've been there for 40, 50, 100 years. They've learned their lessons. They know what is important. That's really why these institutions move slowly. It can be frustrating, okay, but there is also merit in that. Okay, so it's the yin and the yang. Okay, but certain areas need to move a lot faster. Yes, definitely.
Thanks, Mani. Just to check. Oh yes, there's a question.
Hi, Ritabile is the name. Just on this skills topic and what I've seen there with the show, brilliant stuff. But there's something that I believe is still lacking, and I was hoping to hear it from the university or Gender Mark and the likes. We're pushing innovation, we're pushing quality standards and regulation, but there's something that we're missing, and it's a pandemic, but I'm not sure if we're not looking at it. I've been involved in that topic from an OEM perspective, but from a component manufacturing perspective, there's no focus on cyber resilience. And we are digitalizing systems, we are extracting data from the shop floor for insights and all of these things. We're introducing new dynamics within what used to be air-gapped, isolated. Is there any focus from a regulation perspective, from skills, forecasts, from what the academy is doing as well? Do we have that? Because one thing also that I've picked up, especially in the Eastern Cape, these are the rare skills, right? Firstly, the market standards here for salaries is pretty low. No one wants to come here. But we need these things. We've got an industry here. Do we have that maybe as part of some focus areas at all? Because the reason why it's important is that OEMs are putting so much focus on the topic, but there's no car without seats, right? There's no car without an exhaust. If you get breached from that perspective, do we even have that covered as part of the risks at all? Yeah?
Before we get a response, I just want to check if there's no other questions. Maybe just last question from the audience. Yes.
I've got a question or statement, but I think maybe let's first have the answer to your question.
Okay, go ahead. I'm not sure.
I don't know much about cybersecurity. I'll be honest about that. So we follow best practices. There's certain policies that we have to implement in our company and in our product, and we follow those best practices and policies. I think like most other people that are developing cyber solutions, but people still get hacked, and that's the reality of it, right? And to be honest, it's a skill even within our company we are lacking in. It's something that we're now, we've just had our cybersecurity audit and we found some holes, and now we're looking for the right skills to come and help us solve those particular problems. Interestingly, the holes were our fence around our building is too low. So I didn't know that was part of cybersecurity, but it is. Access control was a big issue between different departments and who can access what kind of data. So those are not typically hacking problems, but obviously from a security perspective and an IP perspective, there were some holes in our processes. So I can't sit here and claim to have the answers on what and advise on cybersecurity, because we've got holes in our own company, to be honest.
Maybe I think to add to that, I think Gender Mark and Yanesh, that's not a unique example. I think more questions are starting to be answered. So I also don't know much about cybersecurity myself. I think more questions are coming up on it. It's a topic that I've seen this year probably cross my desk a couple of times, whereas last year and the year before that it crossed my desk 0 times, which I think shows that it's starting to be considered, but certainly I don't think it is at the level or extent yet that probably the OEMs are at from an implementation perspective, but it is something that is coming up more, but certainly not to that level. I think within the component sector, a lot of it is they try to outsource as much as is possible. And the thing I always say is the reality at the moment is component manufacturers have been focusing on keeping doors open. And so whilst a very important topic, there's other things that have probably taken precedent over the last, or importance over the last few years. And so now maybe it's starting to come up a bit more and will become a requirement, much like I think one of the topics we had at the show was around sustainability and actually decarbonizing and doing your kind of carbon audits and the like. More regulations are coming, they'll have to get up to speed with that. That's the reality of it, but it's a relatively new-ish. They've always been secure, there's always been policies in place. I don't think that's not happening, but maybe to the extent that is now required, that is having to increase.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm also not necessarily a cybersecurity expert, but I certainly have spent a long time working in the software industry. And it isn't a big issue, okay? So it's probably one of the biggest issues facing us at the moment. And, you know, every day you hear of people who've been scammed, you know, and there's always tricksters who are figuring out some way of breaking in. Having said that, there's a couple of things we need to do as well from provincial point of view, but also from a national point of view. And is that we do need to invest in more infrastructure, especially if you talk AI. We need to start building our own AI factories, so to speak, in inverted commas, data centers that are able to run the latest algorithms. Because the battle is going to be played invisibly behind the scenes. You'll have AI generating hack attempts, and you're going to have AI preventing it. Okay, so there's this little war that's going to be going on behind the scenes, and it's happening already. So, you know, and it's going to affect all walks of life. Every industry is affected. And, you know, no one can escape it. We're all connected. You know, if you actually think about your phone now and where you keep your data, it's sitting in the cloud. You know, 99% of the time. Very few people are even keeping their data on their own PC anymore. So, you know, how we deal with our information has changed completely. It's opened up huge risks, definitely. So I can only say, you know, the computer sciences department at NMU is hopefully figuring out some really good, cool solutions there, and I can tell you there are actually. The industry is on it. Mobile network providers spend a lot of their time thinking about how they can prevent hacking in the mobile networks. There's a whole industry behind it, so we are getting best practice into the country all the time. But we have to stay on top of it. And it is a career path. It's a big career path. So anybody who wants to be sure of having a job in 20 years' time, go into cybersecurity.
Yeah, so we had this long list of problems now. You've just added another one. Sorry, before, I know there's a question or a statement from the audience, but before you come up, last question that I just need you guys to think about. It's obviously the issue of the battery, because when you talk about EV, I think that's where the competition is at in terms of, I guess, who can make the best battery in terms of how quickly it is for it to charge. But we also haven't touched on hydrogen, which is obviously another form of new energy vehicles. So I just want you to be thinking about that once we get a question from the audience.
Yeah, it's been a good time for me to come. Because where I'm coming from is from a manufacturing background. And what South Africa needs is we need manufacturing, and we need manufacturing to be exported. Like in the GDP of South Africa is 3%, compared to America that's 26%. So our future lies in manufacturing and export specifically. Therefore, we need to become attractive again to the global market. We're seeing that everywhere, and with all my visits over the globe, you go to Mexico, you go to Europe, you go to North America, you go to Saudi Arabia, all of those places, they want to localize. They want you to go there and put up your facility there. That's just going to, South Africa is sitting at the tip of Africa, so we're far away from the markets. So what is the incentive for them to come back and bring business to South Africa. That's where I feel we need to focus on, is how do we close that gap. Then secondly, we're talking about the internal combustion engine, we talk about electric vehicles and so forth. And I've got an analogy that I want to compare it to. It's like in the olden days, we had VHS and betas and cassettes, and it was like in shop. That was the way to go. And I see that as the internal combustion engine. It wasn't the best, but it was there. Then CDs came along and Blu-rays, and it was like in the next thing. And that's where I see EVs coming to the play, because there's no one. And then all of a sudden Netflix appeared, or like in audio streaming. And then all of that fell by the wayside. So I'm just concerned that we are too much focusing on EVs and like with its challenges. And yes, it will be part of the future, but will it be the biggest portion of the future? Where's hybrids? Where's alternatives? But all of that, we would require manufacturing. And that's where, what are we going to do to make ourselves globally competitive in order to fulfill all of those markets?
Thank you. I think you're making very valid points. I think I'll need you guys just to quickly respond to that, and then I'm going to take a last question from that gentleman there, and then quickly touch on hydrogen and batteries.
Thanks, Etienne. So again, I'll start with the EV topic, and I think we've debated this and discussed it quite a bit. And not. I know, Martin, I may sound like I'm anti-EVs. I'm certainly not anti-EVs. What I am for is letting the natural progression take place and really to understand why. So you talked about VHS to CD to Netflix. There was a very clear why the transition happened. With EVs, the why is unclear for me. Because if it's about emissions, then I'm not convinced that that's the right mechanism. We should be having proper public transport, and you'll solve the emissions issue. Or you could cut emissions by 20% instantly by everyone staying at home on a Friday. Mm. So there's or work from home. If you can, obviously not everyone can work from home, but if you get everyone to work from home 1 day a week, you cut emissions by 25% at zero cost. Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. I'm not convinced the why that we've been sold with EVs is an emissions thing. I'm all for EVs because at the end, I think your cost of running an EV can go down to zero, as you say. But it should happen naturally, and the why should appear. Cost, I think, will be the one, but it must happen naturally, and it shouldn't cause destruction along the way, which is what it's done. The last point I'll make on EV is that fortunately we're in an industry that has a very clear marker on what cars are being produced in the world. So we make catalytic converter machines. And we have, I think we're probably like 40% of the market share around the world. So it's an estimate. And we obviously know all of our machines in the world that are running, and every single one is running at capacity. Probably 4 years ago, 30% of those machines were destined to be switched off and burnt, never to be switched on again. They're all running at capacity at the moment, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, by the organizations that said in 2035 there'll be no more internal combustion engine. So what is the story being told and what's actually happening on the ground? And some of them are diesel, by the way, and diesel is now picking up again for whatever reason, but that's just the information we see on the ground. So I think it needs to happen naturally. And I'm all for EVs. I want an EV. I put my $2,000 deposit on a Tesla 7 or 8 years ago. I'm still waiting for it. It hasn't arrived. But he used my $2,000 to build a Cybertruck or something. But I think it's a natural progression. And in terms of your question around why should they make it here, we should be the right skilled. We should be competitive, and then people will go because it's cheaper. It's really as simple as that. Yeah. And it's not just about your factory being effective, it's about the ecosystem being effective.
But sorry, Martin, before you go in, but he's touching on manufacturing, which I think was part of the topic at the NAACAM show in terms of industrialization. Your comment on that?
Yeah, I think so. I'm going to take it from a component sector competitiveness perspective. And I think, yes, there's obviously, we've spoken about it already. There's obviously structural elements in South Africa that need to be worked on to improve our competitiveness. But I also think there's a misconception that we don't have world-class manufacturing here. We have some facilities that are, you could place them in Europe, you could place them in America, in China, and they would be world class. What makes us less competitive? And I said it earlier, and I said, okay, I don't know if I'm now derailing your conversation, and apologies if I am, but it's volumes. At the end of the day, scale economies is what drives our industry, and if we don't have volumes, we're not competitive. It's as simple as that. We're trying to run a factory, but we're producing at less than whatever % capacity. It's really hard to compete in that sense, and that's where I know our board president always says to me, Beth, if you took my factory and put it in Germany, or you gave me Germany's volumes, I would be world class. I would be top tier. And that's the reality of it. So the question is then, well, how do we get volumes into South Africa? Yes, fix some of the structural elements. I think a lot of work needs to go into our own domestic market. The rise of imported vehicles and consumption of imported vehicles, and it hits the component sector too. If you look at any of our aftermarket components, this Metro knows it better than any other with the Goodyear. If you look at the windscreen aftermarket segment, we are not sufficiently protected from imports. That is eroding our market competitiveness because we don't have demand, no supply. Volumes go down, it's plain economics, right? So there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. Africa, I think, longer term solution, frankly, I don't think that's an immediate, it's not the magic one for us. I don't think at this point in time, maybe in 10, 15 years, it becomes something more useful. But at the moment, the volumes just aren't there. But we do need to find a way to be growing our volumes. I think exports, at the moment, from a particular vehicle perspective, we are exporting quite a fair share of our vehicles, but I think the domestic market for me is where currently the big question mark sits as to how do we unlock that part, because that already will add in, I can't remember the exact numbers of the master plan, but with that domestic market component coming in, that kind of fixes the policy program, it fixes a lot, that will suddenly tip the scale from a competitiveness perspective. I think that was my 2 cents on that one.
Yes, Martin.
Yeah, agree, and definitely manufacturing is extremely important. And I just want to throw 1 or 2 points into the discussion. The one was, I don't know if all of you were listening to BMW, I think it was on day one, with Donnie Bester, the way he started out and what he said. Basically said, he's worked around the world and he's recently come back from China. And he was shocked at how many problems there are around and outside the factory that are hindering producing the vehicles. And so we have to be careful as a country that we make sure that the manufacturing culture is upheld. Okay, so you can't have strikes in a factory. Okay. Because then your production stops, okay? And if you're in a worldwide network, then the next time they have to decide to do something in your factory, they're going to think twice. Yeah. So the whole country, including government policy, labor law, unions, and so on, needs to be geared to produce fantastic products and projects on time, just in time, and on time into the world market. Otherwise, you're done. They're not going to give you the jobs. So that was his most important point. And I heard it loud and clear. And I think that's one of the issues that we face here. We can't go and burn down half our infrastructure and then hope to build fantastic cars. That's the one thing. The other thing is, if you look at, so I was part of the study while I was at CSR on the role of manufacturing and what happens. So there's that famous curve on developing economies where the portion of manufacturing contribution to GDP actually rises in developing and developed and then fully developed countries, industrialized countries. And then interestingly, as GDP continues to grow, the percentage starts rolling off, okay? And you can plot all the countries in the world, and there's this curve that shows the trends in the world over the last 30, 40 years. And South Africa went from beginning of 2000s, it dropped off like that. Okay, so all the countries have been doing that. South Africa went boom. Okay, and we dropped from, and the stats were showing about 22% contribution to GDP to less than 10, I think it was. And that's a disaster, okay, because every manufacturing job, and I was part of the World Manufacturing Foundation as an ambassador, which is hosted in Europe, and they study manufacturing across the world, and they identified, it's pretty common knowledge, every manufacturing job precipitates between 4 and 15 additional jobs in the economy. Okay, so manufacturing is the biggest priority in any economy. Okay, you've got to make the stuff. And it's not only cars, it's agricultural products, it's, you know, materials, whatever you look at. So we have to get that right. Really have to get that right. Yeah.
Thanks, Martin. I think just last question. Yes.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I just want to come back to the industrialization topic in terms of manufacturing, the Industry 4.0. I think in terms of component manufacture, the multinational are a little bit better off than the local component manufacturer in that they have experts from the motherboard that can support and roll down the industrialization in terms of fund. I just want to touch on, Beth, what engagement are you doing in terms of local manufacturers that do not have the expertise and support in terms of, like your multinational, to bridge that gap in terms of moving them to be able to access markets, because they will be also competitive in terms of that. So I think that is the question that I pose to you. Any engagement have you had with government or anybody in terms of how do we address a purely local component manufacturer? Remember, there's also a new SMMEs that are coming in that are local that are coming in. Towards manufacturing smarts, we need to support them in that front as well. So what engagement have you had regarding that one? Thank you.
But just before you answer, I think let's just allow.
I don't know if there's going to be a wrap-up. I can probably talk then, not so much in the way of questions, but also a statement. And the reason why I think it's necessary for me to speak is because my company produces catalytic converters. So I was actually intrigued as to how come I was invited to a session with a topic such as this. But I would like to explain a little bit later on, or just make a statement that in the directions that our company is on a global scale going when it comes to R&D in order to cater for the future. So
all right.
perhaps I can do that when there's a wrap-up rather than now.
Thank you. Okay, yes, Beth, go on.
Cool. So maybe I'm going to tackle your question in two parts. I think you first asked a question around the kind of 4IR Industry 4.0, and then you asked more generally kind of supporting local companies' competitiveness. So ultimately, the answer to your question is, or maybe let's take a step back. Certainly the multinationals do have a level of advantage in that they have the, as you rightly say, knowledge coming down from headquarters. They can learn from sister plants. There's also possibly a slightly stronger financing backing behind them coming from head offices. And so that certainly makes their lives easier. Some of our most competitive companies, though, in the sector are locally owned. There's a level of agility, I think, and ability to respond in innovative ways that is possibly easier actually in a locally owned company where you don't have all the red tape and processes you'd have to follow as a multinational. So I think don't discount that element to a local company and how they succeed here. From a 4IR perspective, it all comes down to collaboration and partnerships. For us, our learnings from a skills 4IR training element has really been Masita as a partner. Everyone pays their skills levies to Masita. Masita has a lot of grant funding available, particularly through the discretionary grants. Utilize those projects, and we're trying to, yes, NAACAM, we're rolling out our own projects there, trying to train people and then get them into our member firms. So we're also trying to educate our member firms to say this pool of funding exists. utilize it. It's there for you. Make use of it. Make use of our kind of structure of our membership base, right? At the end of the day, what is NAACAM's biggest asset? It's our members. How do we share our learning? And so we often talk with Yanesh, or if someone phones me and says, how do I do this? I say, I don't know any answers when it comes to 4IR, but I know Yanesh does, so let's pick up the phone and give him a call. So I think as a NAACAM, our role is really bringing the players into the room and trying to facilitate those conversations, unlock the funding where it exists. I know DTIC is putting, or has put funding towards multiple activities, DST, obviously through CSIR. There's plenty of platforms that do exist that can be tapped into. I think there's a bit of an information gap in how to do it, and sometimes there is a bit of a misalignment equally to what sector needs, but that's then where NAACAM will come in and drive it. And the same kind of applies to the localization point. Again, it comes down to collaboration. Unfortunately, the reality is, as much as I can maybe knock on an OEM's door and say, this local manufacturer or this local SME can do this, this, and this, please source from them. It's not always that simple, but what can we do to maybe unlock some of the barriers that might be prohibiting localization or prohibiting their competitiveness? So for example, there's ASCII, which is acronyms, and my tired brain is going to be tricky, but let's try the Automotive Supply Chain Competitiveness Initiative. So that's a multi-stakeholder platform. It's got us as NAACAM, although NAACAM is no longer the facilitator, and we now have stepped back slightly from it and more of a service provider there. But there's AITF to make sure that that SMEs are brought into it. There's the DTIC to make sure government has a voice at that table. We have NUMSA, so Labour has a voice, and then OEMs also participate. So we've effectively got all the voices around a singular table, and there's multiple programs that it runs, world-class manufacturer and black supply development. And both of them look at, well, how do we bring competitiveness to the shop floor? So is it you need predictive maintenance? Is it that your scrap rates are too high? Any kind of general industrial engineering challenges on the shop floor, these programs will tackle. The Black Supply Development Program is a bit more holistic beyond that and says, well, maybe payroll is actually a challenge for you. Maybe management culture, who knows, but it is a much more holistic program where you also get a mentor. We know the industry can be a bit of a, I hate to say, but old boys club to some extent. And so if you have one of the old boys as a mentor, that can actually help open the door. So there are these kind of platforms that do exist to try and support our local manufacturers. We partner with Transnet equally to try bring in some SMEs from their side and give them more scale in our sector, and vice versa, take some of our SMEs and put them into our allied sectors to give them scale. So there's various different ways to go about it. Honestly, and I don't want to sit here and talk and act like the problem's solved. It's certainly not solved. It's not easy. I don't want to sit and pretend that we've solved for world peace with any of these solutions. It's a step in the right direction, but I do think there needs to be a much more strong government role to play in driving competitiveness and driving localization. The reality is, if the policy does not speak to localization sufficiently, so localization will not happen. It's always going to be easiest for companies to import their parts than to support manufacturers get up to speed domestically. And so without that strong policy coherence, all of the kind of multi-stakeholder platforms together will not solve the problem. And so I think kind of almost, I guess, tying back into where we started when we were talking about the APDP2 review, I think if you ask myself, if you ask NAACAM, if you ask any of our members, what is the number one thing we need to take out of that review, it's how do we actually drive localization. The current way in which the policy program, and without going too technical into it, the way in which it's working is not driving localization one bit. We started 15 years ago at 40% local content. We're ending 15 years later with still 40%, or actually now 38.5% local content. Quite clearly there's a gap. Quite clearly a policy measure is not working in the way it's supposed to, and quite clearly that needs to be fixed.
Thanks, Denise.
Question in that regard. Sorry for taking the show here. On localization, now, first of all, economies of scale. South Africa's automotive industry is limited to the amount of vehicles that we produce in South Africa. Now, to localize, you say like in 38% localization that you can achieve, but it's because of the certain companies that's available that produce certain components that goes into the vehicle. Now, you can push it up to, let's say, 65%, which I believe is your the main goal. But now, the economies of scale are not there to justify putting up a new factory, for argument's sake, let's say, to manufacture semiconductors or like in the other components that goes into a vehicle that will get you to that 65%. Now, my question is, why can't we get, we manufacture perforated tubing, tubing components and so forth. So it goes into the muffler, it goes into the exhaust, but it's limited. So that percentage can be maybe, let's say, 2 or 3% of a vehicle's value. Now, that's for the South African market. But globally, there's a huge market out there. Now, why can't companies like ourselves who produce these smaller components export either directly or via the OEM and let that also count towards the OEM? If we can have that, we take the market for sure. And you will reach your localization, but not necessarily like in a historic, okay, there's my vehicle, X percentage is local, but somewhere else in the world, they also need it. And then all of these littles makes a lot. Is that an option?
To come work for NAACAM. No, absolutely. I think.
Sorry. Before you answer, Pat, I just need one person, or maybe the two of you can share 30 seconds. I'm just worried about time because I know you need to catch a flight back to Joburg. So 30 second, and I'm interested just to then get a statement from the gentleman sitting there, and then we can quickly wrap up.
So my 30 seconds, absolutely, direct component exports is our other key priority on our policy list of proposals for this review. So spot on, there already is some level of benefit for direct exports, but we should be doing a hell of a lot more to be growing direct component exports. The second part on the localization, I think Ugo's presentation at the NAACAM show kind of showed it really well, is there's a big range in one OEM's local content rate versus another's, which means we do necessarily have capability to produce certain components here, which is still not being sourced. Windscreens is a perfect example. We can produce windscreens here, yet some OEMs still opt to import it. How do we get that part right? I think comes down to a level of policy influence.
Thanks, Ben.
So I also agree that raise local content, you have to manufacture locally. I think Industry 4.0, Fourth Industrial Revolution, has actually made it easier, okay? Because the requirements are much clearer. You get a set of drawings, designs, standards given to you. You just have to make sure that your factory can adhere to that, okay? And can handle the inputs and outputs, okay? So we all need to jump onto the 4IR bandwagon. We need to make sure that we all understand what is actually required of an organization to work in that new environment. And companies like VW, BMW, and so on have contributed hugely in South Africa to getting that standard up. So supplier development very often comes from the OEMs, driven by the OEMs. So support the OEMs and keep the OEMs here is going to be a big part of it.
Thank you. I think if we can just then have, I'm not sure if he's got the mic, and then once you're done, just 30 seconds closing remarks, and yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
As I said, I thought I was a bit intrigued as to how I'm here for such a topic, seeing that the product that we produce in South Africa as Pure M, the company is Pure M, by the way, by Eberspecia, so we're part of the Eberspecia group, is exhaust technology. And it's not purely catalytic converters. There's more to exhaust technology these days than a muffler or a silencer and pipes and the catalytic converter on its own. But I thought I'd share, because of it being so topical, I thought I would share a little bit about the broader company. Of course, it's a global multinational. It's headquartered in Germany. And our R&D focus is really in two different directions. And don't ask me the percentage split, but there's a number of directions. One of them is hydrogen, I would say in general, hydrogen internal combustion engines, hydrogen fuel cells, because we also recognize, of course, that there's some level of inevitability to moving towards new energy vehicles. So, of course, we must position ourselves as a global company to be able to cater for that. But there's another level of research and development that focuses very much still on what is prevalent in the world today, and that's the internal combustion engine, whether it be petrol or diesel. And if you consider in Europe now, we're moving towards the Euro 7 standard, and this is a tough standard in itself. So a lot of our technology is focused on dealing with the here and now, and technologies that would then improve the overall emissions of an internal combustion engine, because it's still with us for quite some time. Just recently in the Vienna Motor Show, and I wasn't there, but we had some feedback. The information is that the European Union is shifting some of the goals out. You know, the 2035 goals, or what the emission limits are, if you will. There's also some flexibility there. And so as an organization, we must also make sure that we take care of the here and now. And I think to a point that was made earlier on, possibly Yanesh, we see our European companies that are in the exhaust technology are full up. They are running 7 days a week. And these are all supplying internal combustion products to the OEMs. So it's still there, it's still relevant. We would need to really focus on getting our portion, and if you go back to the stats, you know, historically our kind of industry has supported sometimes up to 40 or 45% of component exports out of South Africa. That doesn't mean that we should have a free pass, but we should certainly continue to fight for our slice of the pie. And we see it waning a little bit for a number of reasons. And it's not because there's an EV scare in Europe or in any other markets. There's a number of other factors, but it's still there. And you know, like I said, there's an inevitability, but for the moment we need to fight for our share and continue to focus on our manufacturing expertise and continue to build on that to prepare also for when we have to transition into something else in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure you guys are itching to respond to that, but we're limited with time, unfortunately. I'll actually speak to Denise and Lunga and see if I can invite you guys back, because I'm interested in that debates with regards to the batteries and all of that, and hydrogen.
We're not the only ones debating. People around the world debating it.
Yeah. So if we can maybe just 30 seconds closing remarks, and starting with you, Yanesh.
Yeah. For the sake of time, thanks for having me. Let's continue the agreement and the disagreement, and I think somewhere in the middle maybe is the truth.
How do I top that? Take the truth and then make it action, I think, is the final part to that statement.
So Yanesh and Beth gave me an extra 50 seconds. So I'll use my 30 seconds on the battery topic. I know it's unfair because no one can respond, but one simple thought, okay, just to take away, and we'll debate it next time. Singularity University has, I don't know if people know it, has studied the exponentiality in the world in medical science, in all industries. And one of the conclusions that Singularity came to was that we're going to reach the point in time where we've mined all the minerals, all the materials that we need to be sustainable. So we'll not need any mines anymore. So we will not need any new resources, okay, if we do things right, okay? So we have to go to renewable energy. We have to start recycling the stuff very efficiently. And battery technologies are being recycled now. So you're going to reach the point where it's actually going to be more batteries are going to come out of recycling than are going to be produced new, okay? And that's the opportunity for South Africa. So let's make sure that we build a decent recycling industry. We can recycle cars completely. You know, as you use more aluminium is fantastic for recycling. Plastics we can recycle. Okay, let's recycle the batteries, and then we can become and get the energy from the sun. You know, so that's a whole another topic I can talk on as the nexus topic. You know, solve energy, you solve water, you solve food, you solve recycling, because your energy is free. So So that's where we need to focus now as a country as well.
Martin, thank you. We're definitely going to invite you back. But yeah, I think thank you for your time, Beth. Thank you for your time as well, and Yanesh. We were basically just using this as another way to wrap up a wonderful and a successful NAACAM show, and I hope that it's going to come back to the Eastern Cape again. But thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thanks.